Welcome to The Explainer. We constantly hear about these trillion-dollar valuations and the supposedly unstoppable momentum of the major AI labs. But today, we're going to cut through that massive hype. Because if you look closely, the AI market is rapidly shifting from this wild growth-at-all-costs mindset to a highly calculated game of efficiency, security, and, honestly, survival. The reality on the ground for enterprises is starting to tell a totally different story than what you see on Wall Street, and it's a shift that is absolutely going to change the future of the software we use every single day.
So, here's our blueprint for today. We're going to kick things off with the trillion-dollar AI question, do a quick AI cost reality check, then look at the open source price war, security and the trust premium, efficiency on limited resources, and finally, we'll tie it all together with the big AI market squeeze.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the trillion-dollar AI question and this promised decade of pricing power. We really need to start at the very top of the market, where frontier labs are basically pitching themselves as the next generation of absolute tech giants. The next Microsofts or Googles.
And the financial expectations here are just staggering. Leading companies like OpenAI and Anthropic are actively courting Wall Street for IPOs, with combined valuations sitting north of $800 billion. Let that sink in for a second. $800 billion. Their fundamental pitch to public investors is basically that they possess absolute pricing power that's going to last for decades, banking entirely on the idea that they essentially own the future of enterprise AI.
But here's the catch. As enterprises transition from just running a few cool little AI experiments to actually pushing out full workforce rollouts, the dynamic completely changes. We absolutely have to ask, are they actually worth it? Because chief financial officers everywhere are suddenly waking up, looking at where their spend is actually going, and asking if that massive premium price tag is really justified for everyday tasks.
Which leads us straight into part two, the AI cost reality check, driven by shrinking budgets and rising costs. We really need to look at the raw math that has those CFOs desperately trying to optimize their AI strategies.
Okay, picture this. Imagine your company has a $10 million AI budget. Sounds like a lot, right? Well, if you run your operations entirely on a premium frontier model, like Anthropic's Cloud Opus, that entire $10 million evaporates in mere weeks. Poof, gone. But if you take that exact same budget and run those tasks on an efficient open source model like China's DeepSeek, that money can stretch for nearly an entire year. It's wild. To put that into perspective, high-end frontier models, those absolutely massive cutting-edge systems, cost an incredible 9 times more than the cheapest Chinese alternatives to do the exact same work. 9 times! When an enterprise is operating at a massive scale, a 9x cost disparity just completely rewrites the purchasing equation. Suddenly, having absolute bleeding-edge performance isn't nearly as important as finding a highly efficient model that's simply good enough for the job.
And that massive cost difference brings us to section 3, the open source price war, and how we're actually seeing innovation through restriction. This is the bottom-up threat that's currently tearing through the AI industry and completely shifting the balance of power.
We are seeing a dramatic, and I mean dramatic, jump in adoption driven strictly by price. Just look at the data from OpenRouter, the largest AI traffic aggregator. Usage of Chinese models exploded from just 1% last year to over 40% of the market right now. In fact, 3 of the top 5 models being used right now are Chinese. It's a massive shift, and it shows that developers and startups are absolutely flocking to the most cost-effective solutions they can get their hands on.
So how exactly did this happen? Well, labs in China were cut off from NVIDIA's absolute best chips because of export restrictions. But you know what? That constraint actually turned into a brilliant strategy. Because they were starved for computing power, they were forced to get incredibly creative. They built smaller models, they figured out cheaper training methods, developed much more efficient inference, which is just the everyday running of the AI once it's built, and they coded smarter algorithms. Basically, they proved you don't necessarily need the world's biggest supercomputer to build highly competitive AI.
Now, moving on to Section 4, Security and the Trust Premium, or the stronghold of regulated industries. Because all of this begs a pretty obvious question. If open source is so incredibly cheap and capable, why isn't literally every company in the world just using it?
Well, Aidan Gomez, the CEO of the AI startup Cohere, hit the nail on the head. He pointed out that highly regulated industries, think defense, financial services, power grids, they require absolute air-gapped security. I love how he puts it. They literally need to be able to deploy software into a submarine a kilometer underwater with zero internet access.
That kind of requirement completely rules out massive public clouds, and it definitely rules out non-democratically aligned open-source tech.
The crucial takeaway here is that critical infrastructure just cannot risk utilizing foreign technology. I mean, if you're replacing your software engineering team with AI that writes your code, there is no way you can afford the risk of subtle, hidden vulnerabilities or backdoors being introduced into, say, the national power grid or the banking sector. So this creates a very specific, highly lucrative niche. Enterprises in this space are absolutely willing to pay a trust premium for Western, democratically aligned, and ultra-secure technology.
Which takes us to Section 5, Efficiency on Limited Resources and Shrinking Models for Secure Deployment. Because prioritizing that absolute security, it completely changes the technological requirements for AI models from the ground up.
To avoid massive cloud vulnerabilities and cyber threats, these high-security enterprises are shifting heavily toward private on-prem deployments, meaning they're keeping all their data totally locked down inside their own local data centers, physically isolated from the outside world. No public cloud whatsoever.
But deploying securely on-site introduces a massive new problem: severe hardware constraints. High security settings can't just easily grab massive arrays of chips. So this forces enterprise models to be small and efficient enough to run on just 2 to 4 GPUs. Think about that. A massive frontier model with 10 trillion parameters, which are essentially the AI's brain cells, simply cannot physically fit inside these extremely compute-constrained secure environments. It's like trying to parallel park a cruise ship.
So we're really seeing a growing divide in the AI ecosystem. On one side, you have the hyperscalers, the massive cloud providers like Meta and Microsoft, burning over $700 billion on massive cloud infrastructure for enormous public models. But then, on the exact opposite side, the secure enterprise market is demanding right-sized, highly efficient models that fit inside incredibly limited local hardware. It's two totally different games being played at the exact same time.
And that brings us to our final section, the big AI market squeeze and the new competitive paradigm. Let's look at how all these constraints, the cost, the security, and the efficiency, are coming together to fundamentally threaten the business models of those giant frontier labs.
Here is exactly where the squeeze happens. The original narrative was that the major frontier labs would just dominate everything, but instead, they're losing the bottom of the market to cheap open-source alternatives. Meanwhile, companies like Cohere are coming in laterally and taking the enterprise market with specialized, secure models, actually seeing their revenue jump 6x. Even legacy tech giants are adopting NVIDIA's open-source models over the closed frontier ones. That all-encompassing cloud moat the big labs promised, it is rapidly shrinking.
The financial pressure to keep building these massive general models is just so intense right now. I mean, even Elon Musk had to hedge his bets. He literally had to use rocket money to fund his AI, merging xAI with SpaceX specifically to backstop a staggering $1 billion a month burn rate. But standalone AI labs, like OpenAI and Anthropic, they don't have that luxury of diversification. They rely strictly on their AI economics working out.
So Wall Street is ultimately left to judge these massive $800 billion combined valuations on strict AI economics alone. The initial pitch was pricing power for decades, right? But as we've seen today, the evidence is really stacking up against that. And it leaves us with one massive question. In a market that is rapidly prioritizing cost efficiency, smaller right-sized models, and absolute air-gap trust, are the initial tech giants of the AI revolution about to get completely squeezed out? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.